The night Sable Vane nearly died, she was doing what she always did, trying to fix something that wasn't hers to fix. She'd stayed late at the office again. Not the real office, the Syndicate's front company on Wellington Street. The one with the brass plaques and the fern that nobody watered. The one where she sat in a glass box on the 4th floor and made other people's dirty money look like it had somewhere respectable to be. She'd been there past midnight because the Q3 reconciliation had a $40,000 gap she couldn't explain, and Sable Vane did not leave gaps unexplained. The commute back to her apartment in East Hamilton took 40 minutes on a good night. She knew when she boarded the bus that it wasn't going to be a good night. She could feel it, that specific weight behind the eyes that meant her body was running on fumes and stubbornness was starting to lose. She'd been sick for 3 days. She hadn't told anyone. There was no one to tell. The apartment was a 3rd-floor walk-up off Barton Street, the kind of place where the radiator clicked all winter, and the windows let the cold in no matter how much weather stripping you layered on. She'd chosen it because it was cheap, and because no one she worked with would ever come here. That was important. Where you lived said things about you, and Sable had worked very hard to make sure that nobody at Wellington Street knew anything about her that she hadn't chosen to show them. She made it up the stairs. She got the door open. She made it as far as the bathroom before her legs gave out. She didn't fall badly. She caught the edge of the sink, lowered herself to the tile, and sat there with her back against the tub and her knees pulled up and thought, very clearly, this is not ideal. Her phone was in her coat pocket. Her coat was on the floor 2 feet away. 2 feet might as well have been 2 miles. She wasn't going to call anyone anyway. She'd learned that lesson the first time she'd asked for help and watched the person she'd asked weigh the inconvenience of helping her against the inconvenience of not, and choose accordingly. She was 26 years old, and she had been choosing accordingly ever since. The tiles were cold. She pressed her cheek against the tub and closed her eyes and listened to the radiator click, and at some point she stopped shivering, and that was when she knew it was getting worse. She didn't hear the door. What she heard was footsteps, heavier than they should have been for someone trying to be quiet, which meant whoever it was wasn't trying to be quiet. That told her something. Men who came to places like this in the middle of the night and didn't bother to be quiet were men who didn't think they needed to be. She recognized the footsteps before she recognized the voice. Vane. She opened her eyes. The bathroom light was still on. She hadn't managed to reach the switch, and from the floor she had a clear view of the doorway, and standing in the doorway, wearing a coat that cost more than 3 months of her rent, and looking at her like she was a problem someone had put on his desk without a solution attached, was Kaspar Renn. She said, "How did you get in?" "Your lock is a joke," he said. He didn't come in. He stood in the doorway with his arms at his sides and looked at her the way he looked at everything, like he was counting it, categorizing it, deciding what it was worth and what it would cost him. "You look terrible." "Thank you. I'm fine. You're on the floor. I'm aware of where I am." He was quiet for a moment. She'd learned in the 14 months she'd worked for the Syndicate that Kaspar Renn's silences were not comfortable silences. They were the silences of a man deciding between options. You learned not to fill them because filling them was exactly what he wanted. Information, leverage, the small tells that people gave away when they were nervous. Sable was too exhausted to be nervous. That was, she supposed, one advantage of being nearly unconscious on a bathroom floor. "Why are you here?" she asked. "The Q3 report. I left it on the server. There's a gap. I know. I was working on it." She paused to breathe, which took more effort than it should have. "There's a secondary account. Hollander Holdings, registered in Ontario, 2019. The 40,000 ran through it twice. I think someone was testing the system. I need the original transaction logs to confirm." He looked at her for a long moment. "You notice that," he said. "I notice everything. It's why you hired me." She closed her eyes again. The tile was really very cold. "You can have the analysis by Thursday." "I'll need the logs." "Vane," I said. "Thursday. When did you last eat something?" She thought about it. She genuinely had to think about it. Yesterday, she said, and then, honestly, I think yesterday, she heard him move. The bathroom wasn't large, her apartment wasn't large, full stop. It was the kind of apartment where you could stand in the kitchen and touch both walls, and in 3 steps he was crouching in front of her, and she had the disorienting experience of seeing Kaspar Renn at eye level for the first time. He was closer than he'd ever been in the office. She could see the scar that ran along his jaw, the one that disappeared into the collar of his coat. She'd wondered about that scar. She'd never asked. He put the back of his hand against her forehead. It was a strangely ordinary thing for him to do. "You have a fever," he said. "I'm aware. How long?" 3 days. She met his eyes. They were the kind of grey that looked like weather, not a colour so much as a condition. "I would have been fine by the weekend. Would you?" "I have a plan." "You have a plan," he repeated. His voice was flat, but there was something in it. Not warmth, exactly. More like the absence of contempt, which from Kaspar Renn was its own kind of thing. He stood up. "Can you walk?" "Where would I be walking to? I'm not going to a hospital." "I know. You'd have called an ambulance 2 hours ago if you were going to a hospital." He extended a hand. Just the hand. No explanation, no reassurance, no particular expression on his face. Just the hand and the expectation that she would make a decision. She looked at it for a moment. She took it. He'd come in a car she didn't recognize, not the black SUV that waited for him outside Wellington Street, but something older, quieter, with Quebec plates and a dent in the rear passenger door. She sat in the back with her coat pulled around her and watched the city go past and tried to calculate where they were headed based on the turns. "You're mapping the route," he said. She didn't answer. "You do that in meetings, too. When someone gives you a number, you run it against something. I can see it in your eyes. Some kind of internal ledger. It's a useful habit in your line of work. It's a useful habit in any line of work." He was looking out the opposite window. The driver. She'd only seen the back of his head, broad-shouldered, not someone she recognized, had said nothing since they'd gotten in. How did someone from Carleton end up in financial forensics for a syndicate? She looked at him. "You read my file. I read everyone's file. Then you know the answer. I know what's in the file. I'm asking what's not in the file." She was quiet for a moment. The city had changed outside the window. They were on the expressway now, moving west. "I graduated with honors," she said finally. "Applied to 7 firms. Got 3 interviews, no offers. Did you know that the name Vane reads white on a resume, but the address, the neighborhood, reads something else entirely? Took me a while to understand why the interviews went well and the offers didn't come." He said nothing. "One of your people found me 6 months later. I was doing books for a dry cleaner in Stony Creek. Cash work, no questions." She watched the streetlights pass. "He said there was a position. He said the pay was good and the hours were long and I should understand exactly what kind of company it was before I accepted. Mercer told you that. He said you required it, that everyone who came in knew what they were walking into." Another silence. "That's true," he said. "So I walked in." She turned from the window. He was still looking at the city, his face in profile. He had a face built for making people uneasy. The jaw, the eyes, the particular economy of his expressions, like he'd decided long ago that showing what he felt was a resource to be conserved. "I'm good at what I do, Renn. Whatever else this is, I am very good at what I do." "I know," he said. "That's why I came tonight." She considered that. She decided to believe it, provisionally. The house was outside the city. Not a mansion, not what she'd imagined when she'd thought about where a man like Renn would live. It was large, yes, and set back from the road by iron gates and a long gravel drive, but it was also, she searched for the word, quiet, stone and dark wood and old windows. It looked like a place that had been lived in a long time by someone who didn't feel the need to explain themselves through their belongings. A woman met them at the door, 50s, silver hair pulled back, the expression of someone who had seen stranger arrivals than this and was prepared to manage it efficiently. Her name, Sable would learn later, was Ingrid. She asked no questions. She simply looked at Sable, assessed the situation and said, "3rd floor. I'll bring the kit." The 3rd floor turned out to be a bedroom with high ceilings, and a window that looked out over what might have been gardens, though in the dark and through the blur of the fever, she couldn't be sure. The bed was the most substantial piece of furniture she had ever been near. She sat on the edge of it because sitting on someone else's bed felt like a commitment she hadn't agreed to yet. Ingrid came back with a medical kit that was nothing like anything sold at a pharmacy. Sable looked at it and raised her eyebrows. "Don't ask," Ingrid said, not unkindly. "I wasn't going to." Renn stood in the doorway while Ingrid worked. Temperature, blood pressure, the examination done with the competent precision of someone who had some kind of medical training that had nothing to do with a hospital. He had taken his coat off at some point. Underneath it he was wearing a dark shirt, untucked, and for the first time she had any sense of him as a person who might occasionally do ordinary things like take his coat off in his own house. "Strep," Ingrid said, not to Sable but to Renn, "and she's dehydrated. No food from the look of it. I ate yesterday," Sable said. Said Ingrid, in the tone of someone choosing not to argue. Renn pushed off the doorframe. "I'll have someone bring something from the kitchen." "Toast," Ingrid said. "Broth. Nothing else until she's kept down water for an hour." He nodded and left. Just like that, no explanation of what would happen next, no outline of what she was meant to do in his house, in his third-floor bedroom with the heavy curtains and the window over the garden. Just a nod and the sound of footsteps on the staircase. Sable looked at Ingrid. "Has he always been like that?" she asked. Ingrid considered the question with what seemed like genuine care. "He communicates in outcomes," she said finally. "He decided you were going to be all right. The conversation for him is finished, and if I hadn't been all right, then the conversation would have been different." She handed Sable a glass of water and watched while she drank it. "He does not abandon things he has taken responsibility for. For better or worse, that's what you are now." Sable didn't know what to say to that. She drank the water and said nothing. She slept in fragments, waking to find the room dark, and then lighter, and then dark again. At some point, there was broth, real broth. The kind that meant someone had actually cooked something, not opened a carton, and at some point Ingrid reappeared to check the fever, which was coming down. At some point, she became aware that the chair beside the window was occupied. She turned her head. Renn was sitting with his elbows on his knees, looking at a phone, his face lit from below in the specific way that made people look like they were reading secrets. He wasn't reading secrets. Or he might have been. With him it was hard to tell. "You don't have to stay," she said. Her voice was rough. "I know. Then why? Because I want to know about Hollander Holdings." He looked up from the phone. "And because you can't explain it to me if you're dead. I'm not going to die from strep. People die from strep when they don't treat it and don't eat and sleep on bathroom floors. I wasn't sleeping. I was." She stopped. She'd been about to say strategizing, which was what she told herself when she was too proud to admit she didn't have a next step. "I was managing the situation." Something moved in his face. Not a smile. She didn't think she'd ever seen him actually smile, but something adjacent to it, an awareness of the gap between what she'd said and what she'd meant. "You were managing the situation," he repeated. "Don't. I'm not doing anything. You're about to say something. I'm about to ask you something." He set the phone down on his knee. "The Hollander account. You said someone was testing the system." "Testing for what?" She shifted against the pillows. Her head was clearer than it had been. The broth had helped. Testing whether the reconciliation software would flag the duplication or whether the timestamps were close enough together that it would register as a single transaction. It didn't register. The software let it through. She looked at him. "Your software, by the way. Installed 8 months ago. I've had issues with the version parameters since the beginning, but no one wanted to hear it. Who didn't want to hear it? Calloway, head of internal audit." She watched his face. "You didn't know. I'm learning it now. Calloway signed off on the installation. He would have known the flag thresholds." She pulled the blanket up slightly, not for warmth, but for the feeling of having something to hold on to. "The 40,000 wasn't real money. It was a test run. Whatever comes through next will be larger." He was quiet for a moment, the kind of quiet she'd learned to read. This one was the one where he was reassigning someone's place in his mental ledger. "How do you know there will be a next?" he asked. "Because the first one worked. The software didn't flag it. Calloway knows that now." She met his eyes. "He'll wait a month, maybe 6 weeks. Then he'll move something significant." "How significant?" "Depends on what he's moving and for whom." She paused. "I can find out. If you get me the original transaction logs, not the filtered version that runs through the audit system, the raw logs from the server, I can trace the originating account. From there, I can tell you who Calloway is working with and what they're planning." Renn looked at her for a long time. "You came to my company 6 weeks after a new audit system was installed," he said. "I came to your company because Mercer offered me a job. Mercer doesn't find people by accident." "Then maybe Mercer was more perceptive than you gave him credit for." She held his gaze. "Or maybe I'm exactly what I appear to be, someone who's very good at spotting things that don't add up, and the 40,000 didn't add up. It bothered me for 3 days before I could explain why." She gestured, vaguely, at the room. Hence another silence. "I'll have the raw logs on your desk by tomorrow morning," he said. "I'm going to need a few days to take the week." She blinked. "I have work. You'll work from here." She started to argue, and then stopped because she looked at his face and understood that this was not actually a negotiation. He had made a calculation. She was useful, she was currently not operational, he would house her until she was, and the fact that it happened to be a kind thing to do was, from his perspective, incidental. She thought about her apartment in East Hamilton. The cold windows, the radiator that clicked, the feeling 3 nights ago of her legs going out on the bathroom floor, and knowing that if she'd been worse off, no one would have known for days. She thought about that. "Fine," she said. 1 week. It was 4 days in the end. The fever broke on the 2nd morning. By the 3rd day, she was working from the desk in the corner of the room. They'd brought her a laptop, the secure one, the same kind the senior analysts used. And by the 4th day, she had traced the Hollander account to a holding company out of New Brunswick, connected to a shell registered in the Cayman Islands, connected to a real estate firm in Montreal that Renn would later describe to her, very quietly, as belonging to people he'd had an arrangement with for 9 years. An arrangement, past tense. She put the analysis on the server at 11:30 on a Wednesday night and sent him a message that said only Hollander, full trace, read when you have time. At 11:35 he knocked on the door. She'd been about to go to sleep. She was wearing the borrowed clothes Ingrid had left, grey cotton, nothing remarkable. And she'd washed her hair for the first time since arriving, and it was still damp. And she was sitting cross-legged on the bed with her laptop, and she looked exactly like what she was, which was a 26-year-old woman from East Hamilton who had grown up being told that people like her didn't get to be in rooms like this. He stood in the doorway, the way he always stood in doorways, like he was still deciding whether to come in. "You read it," she said. "I read it, and Calloway is no longer employed by this organization." He paused. "The Montreal firm will take longer to address. I know. I included a timeline in the analysis. Recommended sequence of steps." She watched him. "You could have someone else handle the follow-up. Now that you have the trace, it's not especially complicated. Just time-consuming. I want you to handle the follow-up. I work in reconciliation. I know what you do." He stepped into the room. He did it slowly, the way he did most things, deliberately, without apology. He crossed to the desk chair, turned it around, and sat with his forearms on the back of it, and looked at her. "I want to talk to you about a different arrangement." She kept her expression neutral. It was a skill she'd developed in rooms where showing the wrong thing at the wrong moment had consequences. What kind of arrangement? The kind where you stop sitting in a glass box on the 4th floor and start being useful in ways that actually match what you're capable of. He held her gaze. "There's a role here. It doesn't have a title yet. It pays 4 times what you're making. That's a significant number. You're a significant problem to have solved." She thought about that phrasing. Problem to have solved. She should have found it cold. Instead, she found it honest, which was something she'd never once received from any of the 7 firms that had interviewed her and decided she wasn't quite what they were looking for. "What would I actually be doing?" she asked. "What you did this week, finding the things that don't add up before they become things I have to deal with after they've already cost me something." He paused. "You said you notice everything." "I do." "Then, notice this. I do not offer arrangements to people I don't trust, and I trust very few people." He stood up. He moved the chair back to the desk. With the same deliberate economy, he did everything. "Think about it. You have until Friday." He was at the door when she said his name. Not Renn, his first name, which she had never once used in 14 months of working for his organization. It came out before she'd decided to say it. He stopped. "The engagement," she said. "You were supposed to get married in October. I saw the announcement pulled from the internal calendar." She kept her voice even. "That's none of my business. I know that. I wanted to say that whatever I decide about Friday has nothing to do with that. I'm not deciding based on anything except the work." He turned around slowly. She couldn't read his face, which was not unusual. What was unusual was that he seemed to be trying to find something to say, and Kaspar Renn was not a man who had to search for words. "The engagement ended 3 weeks ago," he said finally. "I'm sorry. Don't be." Something shifted in the careful arrangement of his face. Not breaking open, nothing so legible as that, more like a door left slightly ajar. "It ended because I realized I had been treating it like an arrangement rather than a choice. She deserved someone who knew the difference." Sable was quiet. "I'm good at arrangements," he said. "I understand the logic of them. What I offer, what I expect in return, where the ledger balances." He looked at her across the room. "You're the first person in a long time who I haven't immediately converted into a line item." She didn't know what to do with that. She held it carefully, the way you held something fragile that had been handed to you without warning. "I'll give you my answer Friday," she said. "I know you will." He left. She listened to his footsteps on the staircase. The same deliberate weight, unhurried, certain of where they were going. She looked at the laptop, the analysis on the screen, the careful columns of numbers that had led her here, to this room, to this strange week, to a door left ajar in the face of a man who she'd thought had nothing behind it but calculation. She already knew what her answer was going to be. She'd known it since the bathroom floor.